The icy water was seconds from taking him until a farmer did the unthinkable. On a freezing Tennessee night, Jack Bennett heard a desperate bark echo across the river. Through the mist, he saw a German shepherd fighting for its life, and without a second thought, he jumped. You're about to see the rescue that will melt your heart. But before we dive in, comment where you're watching from and tell us, would you have jumped in? This is the story of one leap, one life saved, and a bond that would change everything. The last light of day bled out behind the Appalachian foothills, the sky bruising into deep purples and fading golds before surrendering to the indigo of night. The Tennessee River stretched wide and dark, its surface a sheet of black glass broken only by the slow curl of mist rising from the water. The mist moved in long, twisting ribbons, folding and unfurling as if the river itself were breathing, slow, ancient, and patient. The air was sharp enough to sting the lungs. Each breath Jack Bennett took carried the metallic tang of winter, mingled with the faint scent of wet earth and the ghost of wood smoke drifting from a neighbor's chimney half a mile away. The cold here wasn't just a thing you felt on your skin. It seeped into your bones, into the spaces between your ribs, into the quiet parts of your mind. Somewhere in the distance, a barred owl called, its voice low and haunting, answered only by the creak of bare sycamore branches swaying in the wind. The sound carried across the open fields, bouncing off the frozen ground, and then faded into the kind of silence that wasn't empty but watchful, the kind that made you feel like the land was listening. Jack trudged along the fence line, his boots heavy with the day's mud. The leather was cracked from years of wear, the soles worn smooth in places where the gravel of the farm road had ground them down. His flannel shirt was dusted with hay from the barn, and his hands, broad, calloused, and nicked from a lifetime of work, were shoved deep into the pockets of his canvas jacket. His breath rose in pale clouds that drifted upward and vanished into the dark. This land had been his whole life. The fields he'd plowed since boyhood, the river he'd fished with his father on summer mornings, the weathered farmhouse that had stood through storms and seasons, they were as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. He knew every bend in the river, every rustle in the woods, every shift in the wind, and yet, for all its familiarity, the land could still surprise him. Sometimes in ways that warmed the soul, sometimes in ways that chilled it. Tonight, the quiet pressed in on him, thick and heavy. It was the kind of quiet that could feel like company or like a weight, depending on the night, and tonight it felt like a weight. He paused at the corner post, leaning on the rough wood, and let his eyes wander to the river. From here, it looked calm, a mirror reflecting the faint glow of the moon, which hung low and swollen in the sky. But Jack knew better. Beneath that still surface, the current was strong, twisting and pulling with a force that could take a man under before he had time to shout. He'd seen it happen. Years ago, when he was just a boy, a neighbor's son had gone out on the river in a flat-bottomed boat. The current had caught him, spun the boat sideways, and flipped it. They'd found him 2 miles downstream, tangled in a mess of driftwood and ice. Jack had never forgotten the look on his father's face when they pulled the boy's body from the water. It was the look of a man who understood that nature didn't care about fairness. A faint splash broke the stillness. Jack straightened, his eyes narrowing. The sound was small, almost delicate, but in the quiet of the night it carried like a gunshot. He scanned the river, his gaze sweeping over the mist and the shifting reflections of moonlight. Another splash, louder this time, sharper. Through the drifting fog, a shape emerged, small at first, just a dark blot against the silvered water. Then it moved, jerking and thrashing, sending ripples across the surface. Jack squinted, trying to make sense of it. For a moment, he thought it might be a log caught in the current, spinning slowly as the water pushed it along. Then he saw the ears. 2 pointed triangles, slick and dark, jutting above the waterline. The head beneath them bobbed and dipped, the muzzle breaking the surface just long enough to gasp before sinking again. The animal's legs churned the water in frantic, uneven strokes, claws scraping at the jagged edge of ice that kept breaking beneath its weight. It was a German shepherd, and it was losing the fight. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The dog's eyes were wide, the whites flashing in the moonlight, its mouth open in a silent gasp before a bark tore free, low, guttural, and raw. The sound cracked in the cold air like a plea, echoing off the riverbank and into the trees. He froze. Every muscle in his body went taut, the world narrowing to that single, desperate cry. The cold, the dark, the weight of the night, all of it fell away, leaving only the sight of that dog, struggling against the pull of the river. Slowly, Jack turned toward the sound. Jack's boots sank into the frozen earth as he took a step closer to the riverbank. The cold seemed sharper now, biting at his cheeks, needling through the seams of his jacket. Somewhere deep inside, instinct was already telling him this wasn't just a passing moment. This was about to become the kind of night you remember for the rest of your life. The mist shifted, curling away just enough for him to see the dog's full body for the first time. Its hind legs kicked weakly, splashing water that instantly glazed into ice along the jagged edges of the broken shelf. The animal's head dipped under, came up again, dipped once more. Each time it surfaced, its bark was weaker, more like a hoarse gasp than a call. Jack's mind flickered through a dozen thoughts in a heartbeat. How far out was it? Could he reach it without going under himself? Was the current stronger than it looked? He knew the Tennessee River could be deceptive. Calm on the surface, a riptide underneath. He'd seen logs vanish beneath it like they'd been swallowed whole. But then the dog let out a sound. Not a bark this time, but a low, guttural whine that cut through him like a blade. It was the sound of something that knew it was losing. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd been raised to believe you didn't turn your back on a creature in need, not if you had the strength to help. His father had once stopped the tractor in the middle of plowing to carry a half-frozen calf back to the barn. "Life's life," his father had said, wrapping the calf in burlap. "Doesn't matter if it's got 2 legs or 4. That memory hit him now like a shove between the shoulders. He took another step toward the bank, the ground sloping down beneath his boots. The icy mud gave way in places, slick and treacherous. He could feel the river's breath now, that damp, metallic chill that rose off the water and clung to the skin. The dog's head went under again. This time, it didn't come up right away. Jack's pulse kicked hard. He dropped the flashlight into the snow without thinking, its beams spinning wildly before settling on the water. He could see the faint shadow of the dog beneath the surface, legs still moving but slower now, like the fight was draining out of them. "Hold on, buddy," Jack muttered under his breath, though the dog couldn't hear him. His voice was low, steady, the way you talk to a skittish horse before you grab the reins. The wind shifted, carrying the faint creak of ice, shifting somewhere upstream. It was a sound Jack knew well, the warning groan of a river changing its mind. He crouched at the edge, his boots half on frozen ground, half on the slick shelf of ice. The water lapped at the edge, black and cold, reflecting the pale moonlight in broken shards. He could feel the pull of it, the way it seemed to lean toward him, inviting him in. The dog surfaced again, coughing, its eyes locking on him for the briefest second. There was something in that look. Not recognition, not exactly, but a raw, desperate hope. Jack's breath fogged in front of him. His hands curled into fists inside his jacket pockets. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, heavy and absolute. The night seemed to hold its breath. And then, somewhere deep in the trees behind him, a branch snapped. Jack froze, his head turning slightly toward the sound. The woods were dark, the kind of dark that swallowed shapes whole. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, a shadow slipping between the trunks. But then, the wind picked up, rattling the branches, and it was gone. The dog barked again, weaker than before. Jack turned back to the river, his decision made. He stepped forward, the ice groaning under his weight, and the world narrowed to the black water, the struggling dog, and the cold that waited to take them both. Jack's boots crunched over the thin crust of snow as he moved toward the riverbank, each step sinking into the frozen ground with a muffled thud. The cold air bit at his cheeks, sharp enough to make his eyes water. He could feel the wind shift, carrying with it the faint scent of the river, that damp metallic tang that always reminded him of early mornings fishing with his father. The beam of his flashlight cut through the mist, slicing the darkness into pale, trembling ribbons. The fog seemed thicker here, curling low over the water like it was trying to hide what lay beneath. But Jack's eyes were locked on the movement ahead, the frantic splashes, the dark shape fighting against the current. The German shepherd's head bobbed above the surface, ears pinned back, eyes wide with panic. Its fur was slick and heavy with water, clinging to its frame. Every few seconds it tried to claw its way onto the jagged ice shelf, only for the brittle edge to crumble under its weight. Each failure sent the dog plunging back into the freezing water, its legs thrashing harder, its breaths coming in short, desperate bursts. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He'd seen animals in trouble before, calves stuck in mud, barn cats caught in storms. But this was different. This was life or death, and the clock was ticking fast. He glanced around, scanning for anything that might help. A fallen branch, a rope, even a long piece of fencing wire. But the riverbank here was bare, just a slope of frozen mud leading down to the water's edge. The nearest outbuilding was too far to reach without losing precious seconds. The dog's head dipped under again. Jack's breath caught. He took a step forward. Boots sliding slightly on the icy slope. "Hang on, boy," he muttered, his voice low but firm, as if the dog could hear him through the roar of the current. The shepherd surfaced again, coughing and sputtering, its eyes locking on Jack's for the briefest moment. There was something in that look, not recognition, but a raw, instinctive plea. Jack felt it hit him deep in the chest, the way a sudden memory can knock the wind out of you. He thought of Daisy. She'd been his dog when he was a boy, a mutt with a patchy coat and a tail that wagged so hard it made her whole body sway. One winter, she'd fallen through the ice on the pond behind the barn. Jack had been too small to reach her, too scared to try. His father had been the one to go in, breaking the ice with his bare hands, pulling Daisy out while Jack stood frozen on the bank. She'd lived another 5 years after that, but Jack had never forgotten the helplessness he'd felt that day. He wasn't going to feel it again. Jack shrugged off his jacket, tossing it onto the snow behind him. The cold bit instantly through his flannel shirt, but he didn't care. He reached for the length of rope coiled on the fence post a few yards away. He always kept one there for hauling feed or pulling stuck equipment. The fibers were stiff with frost, but still strong. He looped one end around his wrist, testing the knot with a sharp tug. The other end he anchored to the post, wrapping it twice for good measure. His hands were already numb, but his movements were quick, practiced. Years of farm work had taught him that hesitation could cost you more than time. The dog barked again, weaker now, more of a hoarse yelp. Jack's pulse kicked harder. He could see the tremor in the animal's legs, the way its strokes were slowing. The current was winning. Jack took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the icy air. He stepped to the edge of the bank, boots half on frozen ground, half on the slick shelf of ice. The river's surface shifted beneath him, the current tugging at the edges, whispering its cold invitation. He leaned forward, eyes locked on the dog. "All right, buddy," he said under his breath. "Let's get you out of there." And then he stepped onto the ice. The ice groaned under Jack's weight, a deep, hollow sound that vibrated up through his boots and into his bones. He tested each step before shifting his weight, the rope around his wrist pulling taut with every move. The Tennessee River was a living thing tonight, restless, unpredictable, and Jack knew it could turn on him in an instant. The mist swirled low, clinging to the surface like smoke from a dying campfire. Somewhere far upstream he could hear the muffled crack of ice breaking, carried on the wind. It was a reminder that the river was changing by the second, reshaping itself beneath the cover of darkness. The German Shepherd was still fighting, but barely. Its strokes were shorter now, its head dipping lower between gasps. The water clung to its fur in heavy sheets, dragging it down. Jack could see the tremor in its legs, the way its movements had lost their rhythm. The dog was running out of time. He crouched low, spreading his weight across the ice, and inched forward, the cold bit through his jeans, numbing his knees. His breath came in short bursts, fogging the air in front of him. He could feel the rope biting into his wrist, the fibers stiff with frost. "Easy, boy," he called, his voice steady but loud enough to carry over the water. "I'm coming." The dog's ears twitched at the sound, but it didn't have the strength to turn toward him. Its focus was on survival. One more kick, one more gasp, one more second above the surface. Jack's mind flickered to the stories he'd heard growing up. Neighbors swapping tales at the diner over black coffee and biscuits, warning about the river's pull. "It's not the cold that gets you first," old Mr. Whitaker used to say. "It's the shock. The cold just finishes the job." Jack had always thought it was just talk, the kind of thing old-timers said to make the young ones respect the water. But now, with the ice groaning beneath him and the black current swirling just feet away, he knew it was the truth. He was close enough now to see the dog's eyes, wide, glassy, but still holding a flicker of fight. Jack reached out, stretching his arm as far as it would go, the rope pulling tight behind him. "Come on, buddy," he urged. "Just a little closer." The dog's paw scraped at the ice, claws clicking against the frozen surface. It tried to haul itself up, but the edge crumbled again, sending it plunging back into the water with a splash that sent icy droplets stinging across Jack's face. That was it. No more waiting. Jack lunged forward, the ice cracking beneath him, and plunged his arm into the water. The cold was instant and brutal, 1,000 needles stabbing up his arm and into his chest. His fingers closed around the thick, wet fur at the back of the dog's neck. The animal jerked in surprise, legs kicking wildly, but Jack held on. "I've got you," he shouted, his voice sharp with effort. The current pulled hard, trying to drag them both under. Jack braced his knees against the ice, feeling it flex and shift beneath him. His other hand found the dog's chest, hauling upward with every ounce of strength he had. The shepherd coughed, water streaming from its muzzle, and kicked again, this time toward him. Jack leaned back, using the rope as leverage, and began to slide them both toward the bank. Every muscle in his body screamed, the cold gnawing at his strength, but he didn't stop. Inch by inch they moved, the ice cracking and groaning with each shift. Behind him, the dark outline of the riverbank loomed closer. He could see the faint glow of his flashlight lying in the snow, its beam still pointed toward the water like a silent witness. "Almost there," he panted, his breath coming in ragged bursts. The dog's head rested against his arm now, its eyes half closed, its body trembling violently. Jack could feel the rapid thud of its heartbeat against his forearm. It was alive. For now. One more pull, one more heave. And then, with a final surge, they slid onto solid ice near the bank. Jack collapsed onto his side, still clutching the dog, both of them gasping in the frigid air. Jack lay on the ice for a moment, chest heaving, the German shepherd pressed against him like a sodden sack of grain. The dog's body trembled violently, each shiver rattling through Jack's own bones. Steam rose from their wet clothes into the frigid night air, curling upward before vanishing into the mist. The rope around Jack's wrist was still taut, anchored to the fence post on shore. He gave it a sharp tug, using it to drag them the last few feet towards solid ground. The ice beneath him groaned, but held, the sound echoing across the river like a warning. When his boots finally hit the frozen mud of the bank, Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He pulled the dog fully onto shore, collapsing to his knees beside it. The shepherd lay on its side, sides heaving, eyes half-lidded but still open. Its fur was plastered to its ribs, and Jack could see the outline of every bone. "Easy now," Jack murmured, his voice low and steady, the way he'd talk to a spooked horse. "You're all right, you're out." He shrugged out of his flannel shirt, ignoring the bite of the cold on his skin, and wrapped it around the dog's torso. The fabric darkened instantly, soaking up the water, but it was something, a barrier between the animal and the night air. Jack's mind was already moving ahead. He needed to get the dog warm. Hypothermia could set in fast, especially in an animal that had been submerged in water this cold. He thought of the old wool blankets in the mudroom, the wood stove in the kitchen, the kettle that could be on the boil in minutes. But first, he had to get them both there. He slid his arms under the dog, lifting it against his chest. The weight surprised him. Heavier than it looked, the water adding pounds to every strand of fur. His muscles protested, still stiff from the cold, but he gritted his teeth and stood. The path back to the farmhouse was uneven, a mix of frozen ruts and patches of snow that crunched under his boots. The wind cut across the open field, carrying with it the faint smell of wood smoke from his own chimney. It was a smell that usually meant comfort. Tonight, it meant urgency. The dog's head rested against his shoulder now, its breath warm against his neck in short, shallow bursts. Jack could feel the rapid thud of its heartbeat. Fast, but steady. That was good. That meant there was still time. As he crossed the yard, his eyes flicked to the barn. The big red doors were shut tight, the light above them casting a pale glow on the snow. Inside, the horses would be shifting in their stalls, the old milk cow chewing her cud, the barn cats curled in the hay. Life going on, unaware of the drama playing out just yards away. Jack pushed through the back door of the farmhouse with his shoulder, careful not to jostle the dog. The warmth inside hit him like a wave, the scent of pine from the wood stove mingling with the faint aroma of coffee grounds left in the pot from earlier that evening. He set the dog gently on the braided rug in front of the stove, then grabbed one of the thick wool blankets from the bench by the door. Wrapping it snugly around the animal, he crouched beside it, rubbing its ears and speaking in a low, steady tone. "You're safe now, buddy. You made it." The dog blinked slowly, its eyes tracking his face. There was no wag of the tail yet, no spark of playfulness, but there was trust. And that was enough for now. Jack stood, moving to the kitchen to fill the kettle. As the water began to heat, he glanced back at the dog. It was still watching him, its gaze steady, as if it understood that this man, this stranger, had just changed the course of its life. The kettle began to whistle in the kitchen, its high, steady note cutting through the quiet of the farmhouse. Jack poured the steaming water into a chipped enamel mug, the kind he'd used since his 20s, and set it on the counter. He grabbed a clean towel from the drawer, the fabric rough and warm from sitting near the stove all afternoon. Back in the living room, the German Shepherd hadn't moved much. It lay curled on the rug, wrapped in the wool blanket, eyes half closed but still tracking him as he crossed the room. Jack crouched beside it, setting the towel within reach. He could see now, in the flickering light from the stove, just how battered the animal was. There were scars, old ones, pale and ropey, running along its flank. A fresh gash on its belly, the edges raw and angry. One ear bent at an unnatural angle, as if it had been broken long ago and never healed right. Jack's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a dog that had fallen through the ice. This was a dog that had been through something. He reached out slowly, letting the shepherd sniff his hand before he touched it. The dog's nose was cold and damp, its breath warm against his skin. When Jack's fingers brushed the fur along its neck, he felt something hard beneath the blanket. He pulled the fabric back just enough to see a worn leather collar, the brass buckle tarnished with age. Etched into the inside of the leather, barely visible in the dim light, were a series of numbers. Jack frowned. They weren't random. They were too neat, too deliberate. He'd seen numbers like that before, years ago, when a buddy of his from Chattanooga PD had brought his retired K9 to the farm. The dog had worn a collar just like this one, with an ID number stamped inside. He ran his thumb over the digits, the leather stiff under his touch. Whoever this dog was, it had once belonged to someone official. And now, it was here, half dead in the Tennessee River. The shepherd shifted, letting out a low whine. Jack pulled the blanket back around it, tucking the edges in snug. "All right, buddy," he murmured. "We'll figure it out. First things first. Let's get you warm." He began to rub the towel gently along the dog's legs, working the water out of its fur. The shepherd didn't resist, just watched him with those steady, unblinking eyes. There was no fear there now, only exhaustion, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of trust. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, carrying with it the distant groan of the river ice shifting again. Jack glanced toward the sound, his mind already turning over the questions he didn't yet have answers for. How had this dog ended up in the river? Who had it belonged to? And why did it feel like someone might be missing it, or trying to make sure it was never found? The German Shepherd lay bundled in the wool blanket, its breathing shallow but steady. Jack crouched beside it, one hand resting lightly on its side, feeling the rise and fall of each breath. The warmth from the wood stove was beginning to seep into the room, chasing away the chill that had clung to them both since the river. But Jack knew warmth alone wouldn't be enough. The dog's injuries were too severe. The fresh gash on its belly, the deep old scars, the way its left ear hung at an unnatural angle. This wasn't just a case of hypothermia. This was a body that had been through hell. He stood and crossed to the wall phone in the kitchen, the coiled cord swinging as he lifted the receiver. His fingers hesitated over the keypad for a moment. Out here, in the quiet hills outside Chattanooga, calling for help wasn't something you did lightly. Folks prided themselves on handling things themselves. But this wasn't about pride. This was about giving the dog a chance. He dialed the number for Dr. Emily Hart, the local vet. She'd patched up everything from barn cats to prize bulls for him over the years, and she had a way with animals that went beyond medicine. If anyone could pull this dog back from the edge, it was her. The line rang twice before a warm, slightly groggy voice answered. "Hart Veterinary!" "Emily, it's Jack Bennett," he said, his voice low but urgent. "I've got a shepherd here." Pulled him out of the river. "He's in bad shape. Hypothermic, injured. I think he's been abused." There was a pause on the other end, then the sound of rustling papers. "Bring him in, now. I'll have the table ready." Jack glanced back toward the living room. The dog's eyes were closed now, but its ears twitched at the sound of his voice. "I'll be there in 10, he said, and hung up. He grabbed his jacket from the peg by the door, shrugged it on over his damp shirt, and returned to the dog. "All right, buddy," he murmured, sliding his arms under the blanket-wrapped body. "We're not done yet." The dog let out a low whine, but didn't resist as Jack lifted it. Its weight was awkward, heavy in a way that spoke of exhaustion more than size. Jack held it close, feeling the faint thud of its heartbeat against his chest. Outside, the night air hit him like a slap, sharp and bracing. The sky was a deep, endless black, the stars hidden behind a veil of thin clouds. The crunch of his boots on the frozen ground was the only sound as he crossed to the truck. He laid the dog gently on the passenger seat, tucking the blanket tighter around it. The cab smelled faintly of hay and engine oil, the familiar sense of his life. He started the engine, the old Chevy rumbling to life, and turned the heater up full. As he pulled out onto the gravel drive, the headlights cut through the mist, illuminating the skeletal trees that lined the road. The Tennessee River was hidden now, but Jack could still hear it in his mind. The groan of shifting ice, the splash of desperate paws, the bark that had pulled him from his evening rounds and into something he didn't yet understand. He glanced at the dog, its head resting on the seat, eyes half open. "Hang on, Ranger," he said softly, the name slipping out before he'd even decided on it. "We're almost there." The old Chevy's headlights cut through the mist, twin beams carving a narrow tunnel of visibility through the dark Tennessee backroads. The gravel crunched under the tires as Jack eased the truck onto the main road, the heater roaring in the cab. The German Shepherd lay curled on the passenger seat, wrapped in the wool blanket, its head resting against the worn vinyl. Jack kept glancing sideways, checking for the rise and fall of the dog's chest. Each shallow breath was a small victory, but the tremors running through its body told him they were far from safe. The gash on its belly worried him most. The bleeding had slowed, but the edges were raw, and the cold had masked how much pain the animal might be in. The road wound along the edge of the Tennessee River, the water hidden now behind a wall of skeletal trees. Jack could still hear it in his mind. The groan of shifting ice, the splash of desperate paws, the bark that had pulled him from his evening rounds and into this moment. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The name he'd given the dog, Ranger, had come out without thinking, but now it felt right. There was something in the shepherd's eyes, even in its weakened state, that spoke of discipline, loyalty, and a history Jack didn't yet understand. The truck's cab was filled with the mingled scents of wet fur, engine oil, and the faint trace of pine from the blanket. Jack reached over at a stop sign, resting his hand lightly on Ranger's side. The dog's ear twitched at the touch, but it didn't move otherwise. "Hang in there, Ranger," Jack murmured. "We're almost there." The town of Red Bank was quiet at this hour, the storefronts dark, the only light coming from the occasional street lamp casting long shadows across the pavement. Jack turned onto Main Street, the tires hissing over patches of slush. Ahead, the glow of Hart Veterinary Clinic's porch light cut through the night like a beacon. Jack pulled into the gravel lot, the crunch under the tires loud in the stillness. Dr. Emily Hart was already outside, bundled in a heavy coat, her breath clouding in the cold. She hurried to the truck as Jack killed the engine. "Let's get him inside," she said, her voice brisk but warm. Jack slid out of the driver's seat, moving quickly around to the passenger side. He lifted Ranger carefully, feeling the dog's weight sag against him, and followed Emily into the clinic's warm, bright interior. The smell of antiseptic and clean linen hit him immediately, a sharp contrast to the earthy sense of the farm. Emily led him straight to the exam table, where she began unwrapping the blanket with practiced hands. Jack stepped back, watching as she examined the gash, the scars, the bent ear, her brow furrowed. "These aren't from tonight," she said quietly. "This dog's been through a lot." Jack nodded, his jaw tightening. Found a number inside his collar. Looks like a K9 ID. Emily's eyes flicked up to meet his. "Then we need to find out where he came from, and why he ended up in that river." Dr. Emily Hart's hands moved quickly but gently, her years of experience showing in every motion. She clipped away the wet fur around the gash on Ranger's belly, the scissors making a soft snip-snip that seemed impossibly calm against the urgency in the room. Jack stood just behind her, his arms crossed, the damp from his shirt still clinging to his skin. He could feel the heat from the overhead lamp, smell the sharp tang of antiseptic mixing with the earthy scent of wet dog. "Pulse is fast," Emily murmured, pressing her stethoscope to Ranger's chest. But strong, that's good. Jack's eyes flicked to the monitor beside the table, watching the green line jump in steady rhythm. What about the bleeding? I can stop it, she said, reaching for a tray of instruments. But these scars. She trailed off, running her fingers lightly over the pale ridges along Ranger's flank. These are old, deliberate. This dog's been through more than one bad night. Jack shifted his weight, the floor creaking under his boots. I found numbers inside his collar. Looked like a K9 ID. Emily's head snapped up. Police or military? Could be either, Jack said. But if that's true, someone's missing him, or he let the thought hang in the air. Emily didn't answer right away. She cleaned the wound with practiced precision, Ranger flinching only slightly under her touch. I'll stitch him up, get him on fluids, and start warming him from the inside out. But Jack, she glanced at him, her expression serious. If this dog was dumped and someone wanted him gone, you might have just stepped into something bigger than you realize. Jack met her gaze, his jaw tightening. Then I guess I'm in it now. Ranger's eyes opened wider at the sound of his voice, and for the first time since pulling him from the river, Jack saw the faintest flicker of recognition. Or maybe it was just the stubborn will to live. Either way, it was enough. Emily's gloved hands moved with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, but her eyes told a different story, sharp, focused, and shadowed with concern. The clinic's overhead light cast a pale halo over the exam table, glinting off the stainless steel instruments laid out in perfect order. Jack stood close enough to feel the warmth radiating from the heat lamps Emily had pulled over Ranger. The dog's fur steamed faintly as the cold water evaporated, the scent of wet dog mingling with antiseptic and the faint, comforting aroma of fresh coffee drifting from the back room. Emily threaded a needle with practiced ease, her voice low but steady. This gash isn't from ice, she said, stitching with quick, sure movements. Edges are too clean. Could be a blade, could be something else. Jack's jaw tightened. You're saying someone did this? I'm saying it's possible, Emily replied, not looking up. And if those numbers in his collar are what you think they are, this dog's history might not be simple. Jack glanced at the collar lying on the counter. The leather was worn, the brass buckle dulled with age, but the numbers inside were still clear under the harsh light. He didn't need to read them again. They were already burned into his mind. Emily finished the last stitch and began wrapping Ranger's midsection with clean gauze. He's stable for now. I'll keep him overnight, monitor his temperature, and run a full check in the morning. But Jack, she finally looked up, her expression serious. If someone wanted him gone, they might come looking when they find out he's still alive. Jack met her gaze, the weight of her words settling heavy in his chest. Then they'll have to go through me. Ranger shifted slightly on the table, his eyes opening just enough to meet Jack's. There was no fear there now. Only a quiet, exhausted trust. Jack reached out, resting his hand gently on the dog's head. You're safe now, buddy, he murmured. I've got you. Outside, the wind rattled the clinic's front windows, carrying with it the faint, distant groan of the Tennessee River ice shifting again. Jack knew this night wasn't over, not by a long shot. The clinic had grown quiet. The hum of the heating vents and the soft beep of the monitor beside Ranger's table were the only sounds in the room. Outside, the wind rattled the glass in the front windows, carrying with it the faint smell of the river, cold, metallic, and restless. Emily was in the back, prepping fluids and antibiotics, leaving Jack alone with the dog. He stood beside the table, one hand resting lightly on Ranger's head. The shepherd's eyes were half closed, but they followed him whenever he moved, as if making sure he didn't leave. Jack's gaze drifted to the collar on the counter. The leather was cracked, the brass buckle dulled, but those numbers inside, they gnawed at him. He'd seen something like them before, years ago, when a buddy from the Chattanooga Police K9 unit had visited the farm. The format was identical. If Ranger had been a working dog, then he'd been trained, disciplined, loyal, and valuable, which meant someone had either lost him or thrown him away. The thought made Jack's stomach tighten. A faint sound pulled him from his thoughts, the crunch of tires on gravel outside. He glanced toward the front windows, but the angle of the light made it impossible to see. The sound stopped. No engine idled, no door opened, just silence. Jack's instincts prickled. Out here, this late, unannounced visitors were rare. He stepped to the window, careful to stay in the shadows, and peered out. The mist from the river had crept up the street, curling around the lampposts. Through it, he thought he saw the faint outline of a vehicle, parked just beyond the clinic's lot. No headlights, no movement. Emily's voice came from behind him. "Jack, you all right?" He turned back, forcing his tone to stay even. "Yeah, just thought I heard something." She gave him a quick look, then returned to her work. "Once he's stable, I'll run that caller number. Might tell us where he came from." Jack nodded, but his mind was still on the shadowed shape outside. He didn't know why, but something told him this wasn't over, not by a long shot. He reached down, giving Ranger's head a gentle scratch. "Don't worry, buddy," he murmured. "If someone's looking for you, they're gonna have to go through me first." Outside, the wind shifted, and the faint crunch of gravel came again, this time moving away. The clinic's front door swung shut behind Jack with a muted thud, the sound swallowed by the thick Tennessee night. The air outside was sharper now, the kind that cut straight through to the lungs. His boots crunched over the gravel lot as he made his way to the truck, the faint glow from the clinic's porch light casting long shadows across the mist. He glanced once over his shoulder. Emily was inside with Ranger, the German Shepherd's blanket-wrapped body now under the steady warmth of heat lamps. Jack trusted her. She had the same no-hesitation grit he'd seen in the best rescuers, the kind you read about in small-town papers or seeing grainy footage of someone braving a freezing river without a second thought. The memory of the rescue replayed in his mind in flashes, the desperate bark cutting through the dusk, the icy water exploding around him, the shock that stole his breath the instant he plunged in. It was the same kind of raw, instinctive leap he'd seen in those viral clips of strangers diving into the Winooski River in Vermont, or the LA River rescues where the current fought back like a living thing. No plan, no hesitation, just a split-second decision that meant the difference between life and death. Jack reached the truck and paused, scanning the street. The mist from the Tennessee River had crept up the road, curling around the lampposts like smoke. Somewhere beyond it, he thought he caught the faint glint of a windshield. A vehicle parked just far enough away to be hidden in shadow. No headlights, no movement. His gut tightened. He'd seen this kind of thing before. The quiet watchers who showed up after a rescue, not to thank you, but to see if you'd pulled out something they wanted to stay lost. The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant groan of river ice breaking upstream. It was the same sound that had haunted him since boyhood, a reminder that the Tennessee could turn from mirror calm to deadly in seconds. Tonight, it had nearly claimed Ranger. Jack slid into the driver's seat, the worn vinyl creaking under his weight. He didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he sat in the dark cab, watching the mist, listening for the crunch of tires on gravel. Nothing. Just the low hum of the heater fan and the faint echo of his own heartbeat in his ears. Inside the clinic, Emily would be starting Ranger on fluids, checking his core temperature, maybe even running that collar number through her contacts. If the ID confirmed what Jack suspected, that Ranger had been a trained K9, then this rescue was about to get a whole lot more complicated. He thought of the real-life rescuers he'd seen on the news. The man in Vermont who'd waded waist-deep into a freezing current to haul a dog onto the ice shelf. The firefighter in Los Angeles who'd been bitten mid-rescue but still refused to let go. The Good Samaritan in New York who'd intercepted a panicked dog in the East River before it could be swept out to sea. They all had the same look afterward, a mix of relief, exhaustion, and the dawning realization that the hardest part might not be over. Jack started the engine, the rumble breaking the stillness. The shadowed vehicle down the road was gone now, or maybe it had never been there at all, but the feeling lingered, heavy and certain. Someone had let Ranger end up in that river, and Jack Bennett intended to find out who. The drive back from Red Bank was quiet, but not the kind of quiet Jack Bennett liked. The Tennessee night had a weight to it, pressing in on the cab of the old Chevy as the headlights carved a narrow path through the mist. The heater hummed low, filling the truck with a dry warmth that couldn't quite chase away the chill in his bones. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror. The road behind him was empty, just a ribbon of blacktop disappearing into the fog. But the feeling lingered, that same prickling at the back of his neck he'd felt outside the clinic, the kind of instinct you didn't ignore out here in the foothills. Jack had grown up on these roads. He knew every bend, every leaning mailbox, every stretch where the trees closed in so tight the moonlight vanished. Tonight, those familiar landmarks felt different, sharper, more watchful. As he passed the old Miller place, long abandoned since the fire, His headlights caught a glint of chrome tucked just off the shoulder. A vehicle, half hidden behind a stand of bare sycamores. No lights, no movement. Jack's grip tightened on the wheel. He didn't slow down, didn't give whoever was in there the satisfaction of knowing he'd seen them. But his mind was already turning over the possibilities. Ranger's face flashed in his thoughts. The scars, the gash, the collar, with its stamped numbers. If the shepherd had been a working K9, then someone, somewhere, knew exactly what he was worth. And if they'd dumped him in the Tennessee River, they'd had a reason. The mist thickened as he turned onto the gravel lane leading to his farmhouse. The crunch of the tires was loud in the stillness, each stone popping under the weight of the truck. The porch light glowed faintly ahead, a warm beacon in the dark. But as he pulled up, Jack noticed something that made his stomach knot. The screen door, the one he'd latched before leaving for the clinic, was hanging open, swaying gently in the wind. Jack killed the truck's engine and sat for a moment, listening. The night was still, except for the faint groan of the Tennessee River ice in the distance. That same deep, unsettling sound he'd heard earlier, the kind that reminded him of the Forever Be My Hero, Man Braves Icy River to Rescue, footage he'd once seen, where the rescuer stood on cracking ice, every step a gamble. The porch light cast a pale cone across the yard, catching the screen door as it swayed gently on its hinges. Jack knew he'd latched it before leaving for the clinic. Out here, in the Appalachian foothills, you didn't forget things like that. He stepped out of the truck, boots crunching on the frozen gravel, and scanned the tree line. The mist from the river had crept up the lane, curling low over the ground. Somewhere in that haze, he thought of the way rescuers and man jumps into icy river to save dog from drowning had moved. Slow, deliberate, eyes always searching for danger beyond the obvious. Jack mounted the porch steps, the wood creaking under his weight. The open door revealed only darkness inside. He reached for the flashlight clipped to his belt, its beam cutting a narrow path into the living room. Everything looked in place. The old leather couch, the coffee table with its stack of mail, the wood stove banked low. But the air felt disturbed. He moved through the house with the same caution he'd seen in Man Jumps into Icy River to Save Dog. That moment when the rescuer edges closer, knowing one wrong move could send them both under. In the kitchen, a faint draft slipped through the cracked window above the sink. Jack crossed to it, scanning the yard beyond. Nothing moved, but he couldn't shake the image of the shadowed vehicle he'd passed on the road. The silence pressed in, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. It reminded him of the eerie stillness after the chaos and man jumps into freezing river to save dog. The moment when the danger seemed over, but everyone knew it wasn't. Jack locked the window, secured the door, and stood in the center of the room, listening. Somewhere out there, someone knew about Ranger. And if the look in that dog's eyes at the clinic was anything to go by, they weren't the kind of people who gave up easy. The thought brought back flashes of man's dramatic rescue of dog from freezing river in Vermont. The rescuer hauling the dog to safety, only to glance over his shoulder like he expected trouble to follow. Jack's hand drifted to the old Winchester leaning in the corner. He didn't want to use it. But tonight, the Tennessee River wasn't the only thing running cold and dangerous. Jack stood in the dim light of the living room, the old Winchester resting loosely in his hands. The house was quiet, but it was the wrong kind of quiet, the kind that made every creak in the floorboard sound like a footstep. He moved toward the back door, his boots whispering over the worn pine floor. The cold draft coming through the frame carried the faint scent of the Tennessee River. Sharp, metallic, and damp. The same smell that had clung to him after pulling Ranger from the water. It brought back the rush of that moment, the way the icy current had fought him like a living thing, just like in the Forever Be My Hero, Man Braves Icy River to Rescue footage, where the rescuer's every step on the ice was a gamble. A shadow moved past the kitchen window. Jack froze, his pulse thudding in his ears. The image of the rescuer and man jumps into Icy River to save dog from drowning flashed in his mind. That moment of locking eyes with the dog, knowing there was no turning back. This was the same feeling, only now the stakes weren't just about survival in the water. He stepped to the window, careful to stay in the dark. Outside, the mist curled low over the yard, swallowing the fence line. For a moment, he thought he saw the faint outline of a figure near the barn. Still, watching. Then it was gone, like the rescuer's fleeting glimpse of the dog and man jumps into Icy River to save dog before it slipped under again. Jack's grip on the Winchester tightened. He moved to the front of the house, scanning the porch. The screen door swayed gently, the hinges groaning. The sound reminded him of the eerie stillness after the chaos and man jumps into freezing river to save dog, when the danger seemed over, but everyone knew it wasn't. From the corner of his eye, he caught movement near the tree line, a vehicle door closing softly. Headlights never came on. The shape rolled away into the mist, silent as the watchers in man's dramatic rescue of dog from freezing river in Vermont, where the rescuer kept glancing over his shoulder like trouble might follow him home. Jack stepped back inside, locking the door behind him. He knew this wasn't random. Whoever had been out there wasn't lost, and they weren't curious. They were looking for something, or someone. And if they'd seen the rescue, if they knew Ranger was alive, then this was about to turn into the kind of fight you didn't walk away from. The kind of fight that, like in Man Jumps into LA River to Save Dog, could turn on you in an instant. Jack glanced toward the mudroom, where Ranger would be sleeping under the old quilt Emily had sent home with him. The dog had survived the river, but as man rescued by firefighters after jumping into LA River to save proved, sometimes surviving the first danger only meant you were stepping into the next. Jack set the Winchester by the door, pulled a chair into the corner facing both entrances, and sat down to wait. The night had settled deep over the foothills, the kind of black that swallowed the horizon and blurred the line between land and sky. Jack Bennett sat in the corner of his living room, the old Winchester resting across his knees, the wood stove's glow painting the walls in restless orange. In the mudroom, Ranger slept under the quilt Emily Hart had sent home from the clinic, his breathing slow but steady. The dog's survival felt like a fragile victory. The same kind of razor-thin win you saw in Forever Be My Hero, man braves icy river to rescue, where the rescuer hauls the dog onto the ice just before the current can take it under again. Jack's eyes kept drifting to the window. The mist from the Tennessee River had thickened, curling low across the yard. Somewhere out there, beyond the fence line, he knew someone was watching. He'd felt it since the clinic. A faint crunch of gravel broke the silence. Jack rose slowly, moving to the front door. The sound reminded him of the tense approach in Man Jumps into Icy River to save dog from drowning. That moment when the rescuer edges closer, knowing the danger is still in play. Through the glass, he caught the faint glow of headlights cutting briefly through the mist before snapping off. A vehicle door opened, closed, then nothing. Jack eased the Winchester into his hands, the weight familiar and steady. He thought of the split-second grab in Man Jumps into Icy River to Save Dog, when the rescuer's fingers closed around the dog's scruff and refused to let go. That same resolve settled in his chest now. A shadow moved along the edge of the porch. Jack stepped back, letting the darkness hide him. The boards creaked under the intruder's weight. Slow, deliberate steps, like the careful testing of ice in Man Jumps into Freezing River to Save Dog. Then came the knock. 3 slow raps. Jack didn't answer. From the other side of the door, a man's voice, low, calm, but carrying an edge. "We know you have him." Jack's grip tightened. The words were like the moment in Man's dramatic rescue of dog from Freezing River in Vermont, when the rescuer looks over his shoulder, realizing the real trouble might not be the river at all. The voice came again. "That dog isn't yours. Open the door." Jack's mind flashed to Man Jumps into LA River to Save Dog. The chaos, the fight against the current, the refusal to let go no matter the risk. He wasn't about to hand Ranger over to whoever was standing on his porch. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the footsteps retreated. A vehicle engine turned over, tires crunched on gravel, fading into the mist. Jack stayed by the door, listening, until the night swallowed the sound completely. Only then did he lower the Winchester. In the mudroom, Ranger stirred, letting out a low, uneasy whine. Jack crossed to him, resting a hand on the dog's head. "Don't worry, buddy," he murmured. "They'll have to do a hell of a lot more than knock." But in the back of his mind, he knew, like the rescuer in Man rescued by firefighters after jumping into LA River to save, that the next time, the danger might come faster than he could react. Jack didn't sleep that night. He sat in the corner chair until the wood stove burned down to embers, the Winchester leaning against his leg, listening to the farmhouse breathe. Every creak in the rafters, every sigh of wind against the siding felt like a signal. In the mudroom, Ranger shifted under the quilt, letting out a low, restless whine. Jack rose and crossed to him, crouching so they were eye level. The dog's gaze was steady, almost questioning, as if he knew the knock on the door hadn't been the end of it. Jack thought back to the moment in Forever Be My Hero, man braves icy river to rescue, when the rescuer, soaked and shivering, still scanned the ice for signs of danger. That was the mindset he needed now. The rescue wasn't over, it had just changed shape. He poured himself a mug of black coffee, the bitter heat grounding him, and began to map out his next steps. First, he'd need to secure the property, lock every outbuilding, check the barn, make sure the old trail down to the Tennessee River was blocked. The careful, methodical approach reminded him of the slow, deliberate movements in man jumps into icy river to save dog from drowning, where every step on the ice was calculated to keep both rescuer and dog alive. Second, he'd have to find out exactly who Ranger was. That caller number was the key. Emily could run it through her contacts, but Jack wanted his own trail, a backup. He remembered the split-second grab in man jumps into icy river to save dog, the way the rescuer refused to let go once he had hold. That was how he'd treat this lead. Once he had it, he wasn't letting go. Outside, the first pale light of dawn began to push against the mist. Jack stepped onto the porch, scanning the yard. The frost-silvered grass crunched under his boots as he made a slow circuit of the property, the way a rescuer and man jumps into freezing river to save dog tests the ice before committing to a path. At the barn, he paused. A fresh set of tire tracks cut across the frozen mud, leading toward the back fence. They hadn't been there yesterday. The sight gave him the same jolt as the rescuer's glance over his shoulder in man's dramatic rescue of dog from freezing river in Vermont. That realization that someone had been closer than you thought. Jack followed the tracks to where they disappeared into the tree line. Whoever had been here knew the land. That meant they could come back. Back inside, he checked on Ranger again. The dog's breathing was steadier now, but his eyes tracked Jack's every move. Jack thought of man jumps into LA River to save dog, where the rescuer fought the current and the dog's panic at the same time. The same dual fight Jack faced now, the physical threat outside and the trust he had to build inside. He poured another coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and began writing down names. People he could trust, people who owed him favors, people who knew how to keep quiet. Because if the knock on the door last night was the first move, the next one might come fast and hard, like in man rescued by firefighters after jumping into LA River to save, when the rescuer suddenly found himself the one in need of saving. Jack wasn't going to be caught off guard, not again. The morning sun broke weakly over the Appalachian foothills, turning the frost on the pasture into a sheet of pale gold. Jack Bennett sat at the kitchen table, the old leather collar lying between his hands. The brass buckle was tarnished, but the stamped numbers inside caught the light. He'd already called Emily Hart at the clinic. She'd promised to run the ID through her contacts, but Jack wasn't the type to wait on someone else's answers. He had his own network. Old friends from his time working search and rescue along the Tennessee River, people who knew how to dig quietly. As he sipped his coffee, the rescue replayed in his mind in sharp, frozen frames. The desperate bark, the plunge into the black water, the shock that stole his breath. It was the same raw urgency captured in Forever Be My Hero, Man Braves Icy River to Rescue, where the rescuer's every move was a fight against time and nature. He remembered the way Ranger's eyes had locked on him in the water, just like in Man Jumps into Icy River to save dog from drowning, that split-second connection when both rescuer and rescued know they're in it together. Jack picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Cal? It's Jack. I need a favor. Quiet one. Got a caller number I need traced." While he waited for Cal to call back, Jack stepped out onto the porch. The air was crisp, the kind that stung the lungs, and the Tennessee River glinted in the distance. He thought of the moment in Man Jumps into Icy River to save dog, when the rescuer's hand finally closed around the dog's scruff, the point of no return. That's where he was now. Back inside, Ranger was awake, watching him from the mudroom. Jack knelt beside him, running a hand over the dog's head. "We're gonna find out who you are, buddy, and why someone wanted you gone." The phone rang. Cal's voice was low. "Jack, that number's registered to a K-9 unit out of Knoxville. Dog's name is officially Sergeant. Retired 6 months ago. But here's the thing. The handler? He's missing." Jack's stomach tightened. It was the same gut punch as the rescuer and man jumps into freezing river to save dog, realizing the ice was breaking faster than he could move. Cal hesitated. "And Jack, if someone dumped that dog in the river, it wasn't random. You might be sitting on the only witness to something bad." Jack glanced toward the window, half expecting to see the shadowed vehicle from the night before. Instead, the yard was empty, but it felt like the moment in man's dramatic rescue of Dog from freezing river in Vermont, when the rescuer looks over his shoulder, knowing the danger isn't gone, just waiting. He poured another coffee, the bitter heat steadying him. This wasn't just about keeping Ranger safe anymore. This was about finding out what had happened to his handler, and why someone was willing to kill a dog to keep it quiet. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he thought of man jumps into LA River to save Dog, the chaos, the fight against the current, the refusal to let go, and man rescued by firefighters after jumping into LA River to save, where the rescuer himself needed saving. Jack knew the next move could put him in the same position, but he also knew one thing for certain. He wasn't letting go of Ranger. Not now. Not ever. The morning fog still clung to the hollows when Jack Bennett loaded the old Chevy with a thermos of coffee, a battered notebook, and the leather collar that had started it all. Ranger was resting in the mudroom, wrapped in Emily Hart's quilt, his breathing steady but his eyes tracking Jack's every move. Jack crouched beside him. "I'll be back, buddy. Time to find out who you really are." The drive toward Knoxville took him along the Tennessee River, its surface still carrying patches of ice from the cold snap. Every time he glanced at it, the rescue replayed in his mind, the desperate bark, the plunge into the black water, the fight against the current. It was the same raw urgency captured in Forever Be My Hero, Man Braves Icy River to Rescue, where the rescuer's every move was a gamble against time and nature. He remembered the moment and man jumps into Icy River to save Dog from drowning when the rescuer locked eyes with the dog mid-struggle, that unspoken pact to see it through, no matter the cost. That was the same pact Jack had made with Ranger. In Knoxville, Jack's first stop was an old contact at the sheriff's office, Cal's cousin, who owed him a favor from a flood rescue years back. The man's office smelled of stale coffee and paper files, the kind of place where secrets didn't vanish, they just got buried under dust. Jack laid the collar on the desk. "I need everything you can find on this ID number, and I need it quiet." The deputy turned it over, his brow furrowing. "This is K9 Unit Issue, retired 6 months ago. Handler's name was Mark Dalton. Went missing 2 months back. No official case file. At least, not one I can access." Jack felt the same cold jolt as the rescuer in Man Jumps into Icy River to save Dog when his hand finally closed around the dog's scruff. The point where you realize you've got hold of something, but it's heavier than you thought. "Any idea who might want him gone?" Jack asked. The deputy hesitated. Dalton was working narcotics before he retired. Made enemies. If Ranger was his partner, he might have seen things, or been in the way. On the drive back, Jack's mind churned. The danger wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was as real as the cracking ice and man jumps into freezing river to save Dog. You could hear it coming, but you didn't know where it would break next. As he turned down his gravel lane, the farmhouse came into view, and so did the fresh set of tire tracks cutting across his yard. The sight gave him the same gut-tightening feeling as the rescuer's glance over his shoulder in man's dramatic rescue of Dog from freezing river in Vermont. Jack parked, scanning the tree line. No vehicle, no movement, but he knew better than to think they were gone. Inside, Ranger was on his feet, ears pricked, staring at the door. Jack thought of Man Jumps into LA River to save Dog, where the rescuer fought the current and the dog's panic at the same time. The same dual fight he faced now, the threat outside, and the trust he had to protect inside. He set the Winchester by the door. If the people who'd come for Ranger before were making their next move, Jack was ready. Even if it turned into the kind of fight where, like in Man rescued by firefighters after jumping into LA River to save, the rescuer himself might need saving. Jack didn't go inside right away. He stood on the porch, scanning the frost-silvered yard, the Winchester resting loosely in his hands. The tire tracks cutting across the property were fresh. Too fresh. Whoever had been here hadn't bothered to hide it. The cold air carried the faint scent of the Tennessee River, sharp and metallic, and it pulled him back to that night. The plunge into the black water, the shock that stole his breath, the desperate fight to keep Ranger's head above the surface. It was the same raw urgency captured in Forever Be My Hero, Man Braves Icy River to Rescue, where the rescuer's every move was a gamble against time and nature. Inside, Ranger was on his feet, ears pricked, eyes locked on the door. Jack crouched beside him, running a hand over the dog's head. "They've been here," he murmured. "And they'll be back." He thought of the moment in Man Jumps into Icy River to save Dog from drowning when the rescuer locked eyes with the dog mid-struggle, that unspoken pact to see it through no matter the cost. That was the same pact Jack had made with Ranger. Jack grabbed the collar from the table and studied the stamp numbers again. Cal's intel was clear. Mark Dalton, K9 handler, missing for 2 months. No official case file, no search. Just gone. The weight of it hit him like the rescuer's grip in Man Jumps into Icy River to Save Dog. Once you had hold of the truth, you couldn't let go. He poured himself a mug of coffee, the bitter heat steadying him, and began sketching out a plan. First stop, Dalton's last known address in Knoxville. Second, a visit to an old contact in the narcotics unit who might still owe him a favor. But as he moved through the kitchen, a flicker of movement outside caught his eye. Through the window, just beyond the fence line, a figure stood in the mist, still, watching. It was the same eerie stillness as in Man Jumps into Freezing River to Save Dog, the moment before the ice gives way. Jack reached for the Winchester, but by the time he stepped onto the porch, the figure was gone. Only the faint crunch of retreating footsteps remained, fading into the trees. The feeling in his gut was the same as the rescuer's glance over his shoulder in Man's dramatic rescue of Dog from Freezing River in Vermont, knowing the danger wasn't gone, just waiting. He went back inside, locking the door behind him. Ranger hadn't moved, but his eyes followed Jack's every step. The dog knew. Jack thought of Man Jumps into LA River to Save Dog, where the rescuer fought the current and the dog's panic at the same time. The same dual fight he faced now, the threat outside, and the trust he had to protect inside. And in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the warning from Man rescued by firefighters after jumping into LA River to save. Sometimes, the rescuer ends up needing saving too. By mid-afternoon, the frost had melted into a slick sheen on the gravel lane, and the Tennessee River glinted cold and silver in the distance. Jack Bennett sat at the kitchen table, the leather K9 collar in front of him, his notebook open to a growing list of names and questions. Cal's intel had been clear. Mark Dalton, decorated K9 handler, vanished without a trace. No official search, no press, just gone. And now, Ranger, Dalton's partner, had been left to die in the river. Jack's mind kept flashing back to the rescue, the desperate bark, the plunge into the black water, the fight against the current. It had been as raw and instinctive as the moment in Forever Be My Hero, Man Braves Icy River to Rescue, where Chris McRitchie doesn't hesitate before diving into the Wonoski River. That same split-second commitment had pulled Ranger from the ice, and now it was pulling Jack deeper into Dalton's mystery. He picked up the phone and called an old contact in Knoxville's narcotics unit. The man's voice was wary. Dalton was working a case before he retired, big one. Drugs moving through the river ports. He made enemies, Jack, the kind that don't forgive. Jack thought of Man Jumps into Icy River to save Dog from drowning, the rescuer edging across the ice, knowing one wrong move could send them both under. That was the ground he was on now, thin, cracking, and dangerous. Before he could press for more, the line went dead. Jack stepped to the window. Across the pasture, near the tree line, a dark SUV idled for a moment before rolling away. No plates he could see, no hurry, just watching. The sight hit him like the rescuer's grip in Man Jumps into Icy River to Save Dog. The moment you realize you've got hold of something, and now it's holding on to you. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the barn. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of hay and horses, but his eyes went straight to the back wall, where fresh boot prints led to the side door. Someone had been inside. The unease was the same as in Man Jumps into Freezing River to Save Dog, that eerie stillness before the ice gives way. Back at the house, Ranger was pacing, ears forward, tail stiff. Jack knelt beside him. "They're getting closer, buddy." He thought of Man's dramatic rescue of Dog from Freezing River in Vermont, where the rescuer hauls the dog to safety but keeps glancing over his shoulder, knowing the danger isn't gone. Jack poured himself a coffee, the bitter heat steadying his hands. He knew the next move might come fast, like in Man Jumps into LA River to Save Dog, where the rescuer fought the current and the dog's panic at the same time, or worse, like Man rescued by firefighters after jumping into LA River to save, where the rescuer himself needed saving. Either way, he wasn't backing off. Dalton's trail was still warm, and Jack Bennett had no intention of letting it go cold. The night was still, the kind of stillness that made every sound carry. Jack Bennett sat in the corner chair, Winchester across his knees, the wood stove's glow flickering against the walls. In the mudroom, Ranger slept under Emily Hart's quilt, his breathing slow but alert enough that one ear twitched at every creak. Then came the sound, faint at first, like the distant groan of ice shifting on the Tennessee River. Jack knew that sound from experience. It was the same gut-tightening moment you see in Forever Be My Hero, Man Braves Icy River to Rescue, right before the rescuer commits to the plunge. A floorboard popped in the kitchen. Jack rose silently, moving with the same deliberate care as the rescuer in Man jumps into icy river to save dog from drowning, testing each step like it might give way. The air had changed, colder, sharper, and he caught the faint scent of damp earth and motor oil. A shadow slid across the hallway. Jack's pulse kicked hard, the same jolt as in Man jumps into icy river to save dog when the rescuer's hand finally closes around the dog's scruff, the point of no return. He stepped into the kitchen, Winchester raised. The back door hung open, the night mist curling inside. Beyond it, the yard was a pale smear of frost under the moonlight. Movement. Fast, low, near the barn. Jack bolted through the doorway, boots pounding the frozen ground. The cold bit into his lungs, sharp as the plunging Man jumps into freezing river to save dog. He rounded the corner and saw them, two figures in dark jackets, one already halfway to the fence, the other turning toward him. For a split second, it was the same look as in Man's dramatic rescue of dog from freezing river in Vermont. That moment when rescuer and rescue lock eyes, both knowing the danger isn't over. Only here, the eyes staring back at Jack weren't asking for help. They were calculating. The first figure vaulted the fence and vanished into the tree line. The second hesitated just long enough for Jack to take a step forward. "Leave the dog," Jack said, his voice low and steady. The man didn't answer. He just smiled, a thin, cold curve, before backing away into the mist. Jack stood there, heart hammering, the night swallowing them both. It felt like Man jumps into LA River to save dog. The chaos still swirling, even after the rescue, the current pulling at your legs. And in the back of his mind was the warning from Man rescued by firefighters after jumping into LA River to save. Sometimes, the rescuer ends up in the water too. He turned back toward the house. Ranger was standing in the doorway now, silhouetted against the warm light inside, ears forward, eyes locked on him. "They're not stopping," Jack murmured, "so neither are we." The cold night air clung to Jack's skin as he stepped back inside, shutting the door with a quiet finality. Ranger was still in the mudroom, standing now, muscles taut, eyes fixed on the back door. The dog's posture was pure readiness. The same alert, coiled energy you see in Forever Be My Hero, Man Braves Icy River to Rescue, when Chris McRitchie braces himself before plunging into the Winooski River. Jack moved through the house in silence, checking each window, each lock. His movements were deliberate, like the rescuer in Man jumps into icy river to save dog from drowning, testing the ice before committing to a step. He knew the intruders hadn't come just to look. They'd been probing, mapping his defenses. In the kitchen, he noticed something on the floor, a faint smear of mud leading toward the hallway. He crouched, touching it with his fingertips, still damp. Whoever had been inside had been here minutes ago. The realization hit him with the same jolt as the rescuer's grip and Man jumps into icy river to save dog. The moment you know you've got hold of something dangerous, and it's not letting go. He followed the trail to the side door. Outside, the yard was quiet, but the mist was thicker now, curling low over the ground. It reminded him of Man jumps into freezing river to save dog, that eerie stillness before the ice gives way. A sudden rustle near the barn snapped his attention. Jack raised the Winchester, scanning the shadows. For a heartbeat, he caught the silhouette of a man slipping between the fence posts. Then he was gone, swallowed by the dark. It was the same fleeting, over-the-shoulder glance you see in Man's dramatic rescue of dog from freezing river in Vermont, when the rescuer knows the danger is still close. Jack backed toward the house, keeping his eyes on the yard. Inside, Ranger hadn't moved from his post, but his gaze tracked Jack's every step, steady, unblinking, like a Man jumps into LA River to save dog, where the rescuer fights the current and the dogs panic at the same time. He shut the door, locked it, and leaned the Winchester against the wall. His mind was already moving ahead, fortifying the property, calling in favors, and finding out exactly who was behind this. Because if tonight was any indication, the next time they came, it wouldn't just be a test. And in the back of his mind, He couldn't shake the warning from man rescued by firefighters after jumping into LA River to save. Sometimes, the rescuer ends up in the water too. Jack didn't waste time. The moment the yard was quiet again, he moved through the farmhouse with purpose, locking every door, checking every window, and pulling the heavy blackout curtains tight. The air inside was tense, charged, the same kind of electric stillness you feel in the seconds before a rescuer commits to the plunge in, "Forever be my hero, man braves icy river to rescue." Ranger followed him from room to room, silent but alert, his gaze fixed on every shadow. Jack recognized that, look, it was the same unblinking focus he'd seen in man, jumps into icy river to save dog from drowning, when the rescuer edges across the ice, eyes locked on a struggling dog, reading every twitch and ripple for danger. In the kitchen, Jack spread a county map across the table. He marked the tire tracks, the boot prints in the barn, and the spot near the fence line where he'd seen the figure vanish. The pattern was clear. They were testing his perimeter, learning his routines. He thought of man jumps into icy river to save dog, that moment when the rescuer's hand finally closes around the dog's scruff. Once you've got hold, you don't let go. Jack wasn't about to let go of Ranger, and he wasn't about to let these men keep the upper hand. He stepped outside into the cold night, the frost crunching under his boots. The mist from the Tennessee River was thicker now, curling low over the pasture. It reminded him of man jumps into freezing river to save dog, the eerie stillness before the ice gives way, when you know the danger is seconds from breaking loose. At the barn, he installed a motion sensor floodlight and checked the locks on the side doors. Every move was deliberate, like the rescuer's cautious approach in man's dramatic rescue of dog from freezing river in Vermont, where one wrong step could undo everything. Back inside, Jack loaded the Winchester and set it by the front door. Ranger settled beside it, head on his paws but eyes still tracking the windows. The dog's loyalty was absolute. The same fierce connection you see in man jumps into LA River to save dog, where the rescuer fights the current and the animal's panic at the same time. Jack poured himself a coffee, the bitter heat grounding him. He knew the next move might come fast, like in man rescued by firefighters after jumping into LA River to save, when the rescuer suddenly finds himself the one in trouble. But this time he wouldn't be caught off guard. This time, when they came, he'd be ready to meet them head on. By the time the sun dipped behind the Appalachian ridgeline, Jack Bennett had made up his mind. The next time they came, they wouldn't be the ones doing the watching. He moved through the farmhouse with the same deliberate focus you see in "Forever Be My Hero, Man Braves Icy River to Rescue," when Chris McRitchie braces himself before stepping onto the ice. Every motion was purposeful, checking the Winchester's action, loading fresh shells, and laying out the gear he'd need. Ranger followed him from room to room, silent but keyed up, his gaze locked on Jack like the dog in man jumps into icy river to save dog from drowning, that unspoken pact between rescuer and rescued. Jack's plan was simple: bait the men, control the ground, and make sure they left with fewer questions than they came with. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the best defense was to step onto the ice first, like in man jumps into icy river to save dog, when the rescuer lunges forward before the current can take the dog under. He started by killing the lights in the front rooms, letting the farmhouse sink into shadow. Outside, the mist from the Tennessee River was rolling in thick, curling low over the pasture. The same eerie stillness you see in man jumps into freezing river to save dog just before the ice fractures. In the barn, he set up a motion sensor floodlight angled toward the back fence, the same spot where he'd seen the figure vanish 2 nights ago. He also rigged a length of fishing line low across the gate, a trick he'd picked up from an old hunting buddy. It wasn't meant to hurt anyone, just to make them stumble, to give him those extra seconds. Back inside, he poured a coffee and sat in the darkened living room, Winchester across his knees. Ranger lay at his feet, ears pricked, every muscle ready. It reminded Jack of man's dramatic rescue of dog from freezing river in Vermont, where the rescuer hauls the dog to safety but keeps glancing over his shoulder, knowing the danger isn't gone. Hours passed. The only sounds were the ticking of the wall clock and the faint groan of the river ice in the distance. Then, the crunch of tires on gravel. Jack's pulse slowed, not sped up. This was the moment in man jumps into LA River to save dog, when the rescuer plants his feet against the current, ready for the fight. The vehicle stopped, doors opened, footsteps on frost. Jack rose, moving to the window. 2 figures, dark clad, heading straight for the barn. He smiled, a thin, cold curve, and thought of man rescued by firefighters after jumping into LA River to save, where the rescuer suddenly finds himself in trouble but refuses to quit. Only this time, Jack wasn't the one in the water. The crunch of boots on frost grew louder, steady, unhurried. Jack Bennett stayed in the shadows of the living room, Winchester in hand, eyes fixed on the barn through the narrow slit in the curtain. The motion sensor light snapped on. 2 figures froze in the sudden glare, caught like deer in the beam. One raised a hand to shield his face. The other scanned the yard, his head jerking toward the farmhouse. Jack's pulse slowed, not sped up, the same controlled focus you see in Forever Be My Hero, Man Braves Icy River to Rescue, when Chris McRitchie braces himself before committing to the plunge. The first man stepped forward, and his boot caught the fishing line. Jack had strung low across the gate. He stumbled hard, hitting the frozen ground with a grunt. The second man lunged to help him, but the delay was all Jack needed. He was out the door in 3 strides, moving with the same decisive burst as the rescuer in man jumps into Icy River to save dog from drowning, closing the gap before the current can take its prize. "Don't move," Jack said, voice low but caring. The Winchester was steady in his hands, the barrel tracking the man still on his feet. The one on the ground cursed under his breath, trying to push up. Jack stepped closer. The way the rescuer in man jumps into Icy River to save dog leans in to get a grip. No hesitation, no wasted motion. "You're trespassing," Jack said, "and you've been here before." The standing man's eyes flicked toward the house. "We just want the dog." Jack's jaw tightened. The cold in his voice matched the Tennessee night. "Not happening." The man on the ground shifted, and Jack caught the glint of metal in his hand. The moment was sharp, dangerous. Like the instant before the ice gives way in, man jumps into freezing river to save dog. "Drop it," Jack ordered. For a beat, no one moved. Then the man let the object fall, a folding knife, into the frost. Jack backed them toward the fence, keeping the Winchester level. The floodlight threw their shadows long across the yard, just like in man's dramatic rescue of dog from freezing river in Vermont, where the rescuer hauls the dog to safety but keeps scanning for what's coming next. When they reached the fence, the standing man climbed over first, then helped the other up. They didn't look back. The dark swallowed them, and a moment later Jack heard the low growl of an engine starting. He stayed there until the sound faded. The way the rescuer in man jumps into LA River to save dog plants his feet against the current, holding his ground until the danger passes. Only when the night was still again did he lower the Winchester. Back inside, Ranger was waiting in the doorway, tail stiff, eyes bright. Jack knelt, resting a hand on the dog's head. "They're getting bolder," he murmured. "Next time, we end this." In the back of his mind, he thought of man rescued by firefighters after jumping into LA River to save, the reminder that even the rescuer can end up in trouble. But trouble was coming either way, and Jack Bennett was done waiting for it. The night was still thick with mist when the sound of the SUV faded into the hills. Jack Bennett didn't go back inside right away. He stood in the yard, Winchester in hand, eyes scanning the frost-silvered ground for anything the intruders might have left behind. Near the gate, he found it, a torn scrap of black fabric snagged on the wire. He crouched, pulling it free, the way a rescuer in Forever Be My Hero, Man Braves Icy River to Rescue, pulls a dog's collar from the ice. Careful, deliberate, knowing it might be the only clue. Back inside, he laid the fabric on the kitchen table and studied it under the lamp. Tactical weave, industrial stitching, not something you bought at a feed store. It reminded him of the precision in man jumps into Icy River to save dog from drowning. Every move intentional, every choice built for survival. He called Cal. "I've got something. Black tactical fabric, heavy duty. Can you run it?" While he waited, Jack poured coffee and sat in the dark, Ranger at his feet. The dog's steady breathing was a reminder of the moment in man jumps into Icy River to save dog when the rescuer finally gets the animal to shore. Relief mixing with the knowledge that the real work isn't over. Cal called back 20 minutes later. "Jack, that fabric's from a jacket issued to a private security outfit out of Knoxville. Name's Black Hollow Protective. They've got a reputation, and not the good kind." Jack's mind flashed to man, jumps into freezing river to save dog. The ice cracking faster than you can move, the danger suddenly closer than you thought. Cal hesitated. And here's the kicker. Mark Dalton filed a complaint against them 3 weeks before he disappeared. Jack's grip tightened on the phone. The connection was clear now. as sharp as the rescuer's glance over his shoulder and man's dramatic rescue of dog from freezing river in Vermont, knowing exactly where the threat is coming from. He hung up and looked at Ranger. "We've got our lead, buddy, and it's pointing straight at Knoxville." Outside, the mist was lifting, the moonlight spilling across the pasture in long silver ribbons. Jack stood at the fence line, phone still warm in his hand from Cal's call. "Dalton's alive, and Black Hollow has him." The words hung in the cold air, heavy as the night he'd pulled Ranger from the river. The shock of the freezing water biting into his skin like in "Forever Be My Hero, man braves icy river to rescue." The desperate scramble to keep the dog's head above the surface, as in man jumps into icy river to save dog from drowning. The final surge to shore, like man jumps into icy river to save dog. He thought of man jumps into LA River to save dog, the rescuer bracing against the current, refusing to let go, and man rescued by firefighters after jumping into LA River to save. The reminder that sometimes the fight pulls you under. Either way, he was going in again. If you felt the frost in your lungs, the pounding in your chest, and the relief of seeing Ranger alive on the bank, don't stop here. Share the story, pass it on. And be ready when Jack takes the fight into the city, because the hunt is about to turn deadly.